Subscribe and click the notification bell to stay updated with the latest videos from School of Technology, Management and Engineering and MIMS Indore.
We will now begin with our session of integration of IoT and cloud by our session experts for today, Mr. Murtaza Sultan and Ms. Akriti Nagaria, students from MBA Tech 4th year, STME NMIMS Indore. The prerequisites are shared in the chat box, which you have to open in your browser during the session. Hope you all enjoy the session. Over to you, Murtaza and Akriti.
Hello and good afternoon. I, Akriti Nagaria,
And I, Murtaza Sultan,
welcome you all to this amazing session on integration of cloud and IoT, that is Internet of Things. First, let's take a look at the topics that we are going to cover in the session of 1.5 hours. So, first, we will begin with the history of IoT. Then we will look at the definition of IoT with some examples. We will see how IoT works. After that, we will tell you some really common examples of IoT in our day-to-day life. Then we will introduce you to the concept of cloud computing. After that, we will see why cloud is so important in our lives. Then we will look at the main characteristics of cloud. We will learn the types of deployment and service models. Then we will look at some advantages of cloud computing. And then we will tell you how cloud and IoT have a complementary relationship. Then we will look at some security threats and concerns related to cloud and IoT. Then we will learn how to deploy your own website on cloud. And then finally, we will build a small project where you can see the working of IoT and cloud together.
just to make sure that you all find the session interactive and can participate, we have put in some quiz questions based on what we tell you. So I request you to be attentive and participate in the quizzes. To familiarize you all with the method of participating, kindly answer this dummy question. Either the glass is half filled or half empty. To answer the question, scan the QR code given, or you can even answer by going to www.menti.com and using the code 12843573. I request everyone to please answer. So let's proceed. Before moving on, I would like to tell you that if you all have any doubt, you can share your doubts in the chat box and we'll try and answer as many as possible. So let's start with the introduction for Internet of Things, and let's try to understand what it is and how it has become one of the leading emerging technologies of the recent times. The term Internet of Things was coined by Kevin Ashton in 1999, although it took at least another decade for the technology to catch up with the vision. The IoT integrates the interconnectedness of human culture, our things, with the interconnectedness of our digital information system, the Internet. Adding RFID tags to the expensive pieces of equipment to help track the location was one of the first IoT applications. But since then, the cost of adding sensors and an internet connection to objects has continued to fall. And experts predict that this basic functionality would one day cost as little as maybe 6 or 7 rupees, making it possible to connect nearly everything to the internet. Now, definition of IoT. There is no single or universal way to define Internet of Things. So let us try and understand it using an example. Imagine yourself lying on your comfy couch, watching your favorite movie, series, or sport, whatever, and your mom calls for you and says, कि सुन, दूध गैस पर चढ़ाया है, ऊपर आए उससे पहले गैस बंद कर देना. And the next thing you're waiting by the gas stove for the milk to come up. It takes a lot of time and attention, by the way. And even after waiting there for so much time, you might not be attentive enough and the milk might spill. Now your mood is off because you did not get to watch your favorite show and also your mom scolds you. Now imagine, what if you got a notification on your phone saying that milk level has reached 80%. Kindly turn off the gas stove. You just go and turn off the gas simply and you do not even miss a single scene of your show. You are happy, your mom is happy. Now this is not a far-fetched imagination. This can be turned into reality using a sensor and an internet connection, all thanks to IoT.
In less than a decade, we have gone from using our fingers to interact with a device, the touchscreen phones, to being able to talk to our devices by saying, for example, "Okay, Google, set a reminder for tomorrow," to now have devices talk to each other without our help. For example, being your Fitbit, sending a notification on your mobile phone when a targeted number of steps have been achieved. Now, for a formal definition, the term Internet of Things generally refers to scenarios where network connectivity, and computing capability extends to objects, sensors, and everyday items not normally considered computers, allowing these devices to generate, exchange, and consume data with minimal human intervention. Now, three terms in this definition can help you understand the concept of IoT in more detail. Those are everyday items or objects, computing capability, and network connectivity. The first thing we do is take a thing, a normal day to day item with minimal functionality. Next, we do is we add some kind of computational intelligence to our thing. Usually, it is an Arduino board or anything of that sort that is capable of computing things and improving the functionality of your object to make the device do things it did before but better. Finally, we add an internet connection to our device to further enhance its functionality. It is pretty obvious because it is Internet of Things. Adding a network enables the device to use other resources which are not local. All put together, we call it generally an IoT device.
Let us take a refrigerator for an example. It is just a thing, an everyday object used to keep things cold and fresh. Now, a traditional refrigerator without computational abilities and internet keeps the items cold and fresh. That's pretty much it, nothing else. An intelligent refrigerator, still a non IoT one, is capable of a lot more things than what a traditional one is because it is added with a computational intelligent device. It can, for example, tell you when the door is not closed. It can tell you the temperature of different compartments it has and other useful things. It does that by using the sensors that are built in, but it is still not connected to the internet, so it is still not an IoT device. Now, the IoT refrigerator. With the addition of an internet connection, we can add another dimension of features with our traditional refrigerator, which wasn't capable of much before. For example, it can send you a notification when you're low on some stuff, for example, milk, butter, etc., anything, so that you can buy that stuff. Or it can even help you buy that stuff by searching the internet for it and recommend you to buy from a particular website because it is much cheaper there. Another example, maybe it can look for the ingredients you are left with in your fridge and it can send you recipes using just those ingredients. So yeah, this was how IoT can actually improve our lives. So to sum up, IoT is a network of physical objects using embedded electronics to inter-exchange data with other devices.
So, here is the first question for you all. Which two things are necessary for a basic thing to be an IoT device? The first option is network connection plus calculator. Second option is AI plus ML. And the third option is computational capability plus network connectivity. Scan the QR code or go to www.menti.com and enter the code which is being displayed on the slide currently to answer the questions correctly. Okay, so have started getting the answers. Okay, so 5% people have answered network connection plus calculator, and 13%, okay, it's changing. Okay, so 15% of the audience have answered AI plus machine learning, and 83% of the audience have answered computational capability plus network connection. So the correct answer is the third option, that is computational capability plus network connection. So next come to working of IoT. So since we have a fair idea of what exactly IoT is, let us understand how it works. When talking about how IoT works, the process begins with devices that have built-in sensors. These devices are connected to IoT platforms or clouds, which we will come onto in a few minutes. Now, these IoT platforms store data from all the connected devices. The important data is then used to perform tasks that fulfill the needs of people. Now, let's dig a bit deeper into it. A complete IoT system integrates four distinct components: sensors or devices, connectivity, data processing, and a user interface. Sensor is nothing but any device that is capable of collecting data from the environment. A temperature sensor, your mobile camera, even its microphone are all the examples of a sensor. Next component is connectivity. Now the data collected is sent to a cloud through a network connection, Wi-Fi, 3G or 4G, etc. Next, once the data gets to the cloud, software performs some kind of processing on it so that the right action can be taken. This could be very simple, such as checking that the temperature reading is within an acceptable range or not. But what happens when the temperature is not within the range of acceptance? That is where the user comes in. This information is made useful to the end user in some way. This could be via an alert to the user, via email, text, notification, etc.
Now let us understand this with a really common example we all use in our daily life, Google Assistant or Siri. The microphone in your mobile phone acts as a sensor. It collects your voice commands as data and sends it to Google or Apple Cloud. For example, you say, "Hey Google, what will be the weather tomorrow?" This command is now stored in the cloud, and the information based on that command is sent to your mobile phone. As simple as that. So, to summarize, an IoT system consists of sensors or devices which talk to the cloud through some kind of connectivity. Once the data gets to the cloud, software processes it and then might decide to perform an action, such as sending an alert or automatically adjusting the sensors or devices without the need for the user.
So, where can you see IoT in action? Those fitness trackers or smartwatches you wear? The ones that can track your movement, heart rate, and sleep patterns? IoT. The smart devices in home, such as the smart TV, lights, fridge, and your Alexa, Google Home, Siri, Cortana, IoT. There are even smart pills that you can ingest so that doctors can monitor your insights, make diagnosis, and help you get better. It's all IoT. It is therefore safe to say that IoT is here to stay.
So here comes the next question. Which of the following is an IoT device? Option 1, self-driving car. Option 2, a computer. Or option 3, a wristwatch. To answer the question, scan the QR code or go to www.menti.com and use the code 50739909. Okay, so we are getting responses. Some people think that a computer is an IoT device, others think a wristwatch is an IoT device. But I would like to tell you that the correct answer is a self-driving car. Remember that we told you that a computer is a non-IoT device. And also a wristwatch, a normal wristwatch is not an IoT device. Your smartwatch or Fitbit, that is an IoT device. So, okay, let's continue. Now that we have a fair idea of what actually IoT is, let us start with the concept of cloud computing. Now, cloud computing is the delivery of different services through the internet. These resources include tools and applications like data storage, servers, databases, networking, and software. Rather than keeping files on a proprietary hardware or local storage device, cloud-based storage makes it possible to save them to a remote database. As long as an electronic device has access to the web or internet, it has access to the data and the software programs to run it. Cloud computing is a really popular option for some people and businesses for a number of reasons, including cost savings, increased productivity, speed and efficiency, performance, security, and many more. So obviously, cloud here doesn't mean the white fluffy thing we see in the sky. It is named as such because the information being accessed is found remotely in the cloud or a virtual space. Next up, why do we need cloud computing? Simply put, cloud computing is computing based on the internet. In the past, people would run applications or programs from software downloaded on a physical computer or server in their building. Cloud computing allows people to access to the same kinds of applications through the internet.
It helps in streamlining and simplifying business applications, fastening time to market, and meeting customer demands effectively. With the help of cloud computing, you can reduce overhead expenditure on testing, integration, and maintenance, shorten time to release new features, scale the processes up and down according to needs, increase the flexibility of the systems with the help of sophisticated solutions that cloud providers are steadily developing, and many other benefits, as you can see here in the image. Thus, deciding to migrate to a cloud is a huge step for any business. As you can see, it can help improve efficiency, meet the growing demands on a company, and boost productivity. Next up, let's have a look at the 5 characteristics of cloud computing. The first one is on-demand self-service. Cloud computing self-services are available on demand and do not require much human intervention. The user himself can provision, manage, and monitor the resources as per his requirement. This is done through a web-based self-service management console. For example, for booking a ticket on a travel portal, a passenger gets the flexibility to book his ticket by himself without any human interaction. Right from choosing the flight to the preference class, the process is entirely automated and does not require any salesperson in between.
The next characteristic is broad network access. So cloud computing is accessible from a network, generally over the internet. Similarly, private cloud services can be accessed from anywhere within the enterprise. The services are provided over heterogeneous devices such as mobile phones, laptops, tablets, etc. In the above example, the passenger can book his tickets via the internet from any device like a smartphone, tablet, laptop, office computer, etc., which has access to a network.
Third one is resource pooling. Computer resources like networks, servers, storage, applications, and service can be pooled to serve multiple consumers by securely separating the resources on a logical level. This is done using a multi-tenant model which allows multiple customers to share the same application or physical infrastructure while retaining data security and privacy. It is the same as an apartment building where many people share the same building infrastructure but still have the privacy of the apartment. If we take the same example of the travel portal, the flights can carry several passengers in a single trip. These passengers travel to the same destination, board the same flight, and are allotted separate seats as per the demand and requirement.
Now, the next characteristic of cloud computing is rapid elasticity. Resource capabilities can be elastically provisioned and released to meet immediate requirements. Similarly, they can be removed or scaled down when not required. In many cases, this can even happen automatically in response to business demands. This makes sure that the application has the capacity it needs at any point of time. Scalability adds a cost effectiveness aspect to cloud technology. When the demand or workload is high, more servers can be added for that particular period. For example, to meet the demand of increasing number of passengers, an airline can simply increase the number of flights for a particular time and stop the flights when the demand goes down.
The fifth one is measured service. The utilization of resources is tracked, monitored, controlled, and reported for each occupant. This gives transparency to both the service provider and the consumer. The cloud system has a metering capability, which is leveraged to monitor billing, use of resources, and pay only for what has been used. When a passenger is traveling by train, he has to pay only for the distance traveled by him and not the entire journey that the train takes. So these five characteristics of cloud computing are what make the technology the most buzzing and in-demand technology of today. So next up, we have the third question for you all. Which of these is not a characteristics of cloud computing? The first option is on-demand self-service. Second option is resource pooling. Third option is narrow network access. And fourth option is measured services. Scan the QR code or go to www.menti.com and enter the code which is being displayed on the slide currently to answer the question correctly. So we have started getting responses from audience. Okay. So some people think that it is measured services, and then 8%, 7% people think that it is on-demand self-service, and 14% people think that it is resource pooling, and 66%, that is the highest number of percentage, thinks that it is narrow network access. So the correct answer is the narrow network access.
Moving on, now let us quickly go through the concept of deployment models and its types. So now what is a cloud deployment model? It works as your virtual computing environment with a choice of deployment model depending on how much data you want to store and who has the access to the infrastructure. So there are four types of cloud deployment models: public, private, community, and hybrid. Each deployment model is defined according to where the infrastructure for the environment is located. Now you may ask, why do we have all these different cloud deployment models and which one is good for me? Well, we have these models because cloud computing is very efficient and has become very popular.
At the same time, companies try to use their existing data centers with the same efficiency and features. Some companies can't just move to the public cloud for different reasons. For example, compliance and data protection laws may bar them from using the public cloud. Or they may be reluctant to move to the public cloud simply because they previously spent gobs of money on their own servers and they want to get use out of them. That is why we have a few cloud deployment models to facilitate all the possible scenarios. To determine which cloud deployment model could be suitable for us, we need to understand all four models first. So the first one is public cloud. The public cloud deployment model is the most popular type of cloud. It is also the one that people think about when they say cloud. The basic principle is that with the public cloud, you don't own any hardware. All the resources are provided to you by a cloud service provider. So, to start using the public cloud, the only thing you need to do is to create an account. The biggest advantages of the public cloud are scalability, efficiency, and that you don't need to purchase your own hardware. Imagine you build a platform that occasionally experiences a high load. Without a cloud, you would have to make some sacrifices. One option would be to buy enough servers to handle the load at peaks, but that would mean that most of the time all those servers would be underutilized. Another option would be to buy only enough servers to handle the average load, but then your application would be performing poorly with occasional spikes. With the cloud, you can have both enough resources for load spikes without significant upfront investment. In addition, you are built only for the resources you use, and you can provision resources on an ad hoc basis when needed and even load based auto scaling. Cloud providers also offer many public cloud services besides simple virtual machines and storage. AWS, Amazon, Microsoft Azure, IBM Cloud, and Google Cloud are just a few examples of a public cloud.
So next type is private cloud. The private cloud deployment model is opposite of the public cloud. It is a dedicated environment for one user or customer. You do not share the hardware with any other users. In fact, most commonly, all the hardware is yours. So then what is the difference between a typical ordinary on-premises data center and a private cloud then? The difference is in the way you manage all the hardware. A private cloud is when you manage your data center in a similar way as the public cloud providers do. You create an abstraction layer on top of your physical servers. This gives you a flexibility similar to a public cloud. If you add new servers to your data center with a private cloud, you won't have to worry about configuring them. They'll semi-automatically become a part of the cluster. You can also get a private cloud from a public cloud provider. This means that a cloud provider will isolate some resources from its cloud and make them available only to you. But no matter if you have your private cloud in your data center or from a cloud provider, the point here is that the resources are dedicated to a single organization. Some of the examples of private cloud deployment model are Red Hat OpenStack, Rackspace, IBM Bluemix Private Cloud, Microsoft Azure Stack, and VMware Private Cloud are a few examples.
So the third type is hybrid cloud. As you may have guessed, a hybrid cloud deployment model is the combination of a public cloud and a private cloud. It is the second most important model since many companies already have some hardware of their own and would like to use it. Creating a hybrid cloud means that a company is using the public cloud but also owns on-premises systems, and there is the connection between the two. They work as one system. This is a very useful model that allows for a smooth transition into the public cloud over a longer period of time. Due to security requirements or data protection, some companies can't operate only in the public cloud. So they may choose the hybrid cloud to combine the requirements with the benefits of a public cloud. They run mission critical applications with the sensitive data on premises while having all the rest in the public cloud.
The last cloud deployment model we'll discuss is a community cloud. Maybe you even haven't heard about it before, and there's a reason for that. This cloud is dedicated only for a few organizations from the same community. Thus, it is not a public cloud because it is not open for everyone, but it is also not a private cloud because there is more than one user or organization which is using it. An example of a community cloud could be a cloud that a few different banks use. The biggest advantage of a community cloud is the fact that it can be tailored to requirements for a specific community.
So far, we have discussed different cloud deployment models. They define how you provision and manage hardware. But no matter how you do this part, there are different cloud service models available as the next step of your cloud environment. What does it mean? Imagine that you need, for example, a MySQL server in a cloud environment. You could create a virtual machine and install MySQL on it yourself. You would have to take care of all the configurations and upgrades in the future. Another option would be to request a MySQL server directly from the cloud service provider. A cloud service provider would install, configure, and manage a MySQL server for you. So these are two examples of cloud service models. Cloud computing is not a single piece of technology like a microchip or a cell phone. Rather, it is a system primarily comprised of three services. The first one is infrastructure as a service, that is IaaS. Then second one is software as a service, that is SaaS. And the third one is platform as a service, that is PaaS.
Now, infrastructure as a service or IaaS, it involves a method for delivering everything from operating systems to servers and storage through IP-based connectivity as part of an on-demand service. Clients can avoid the need to purchase software or servers and instead procure these resources in an outsourced on-demand service. Popular examples of the IaaS system include IBM Cloud and Microsoft Azure. Let me give you a simple explanation using a car analogy. On-premises data center is like owning a car. When you purchase a car, you're responsible for its repairs. When you need to upgrade, you just buy a new car. Now, infrastructure as a service or IaaS is a little bit like hiring a car. When you hire a car, you choose the car you want to drive and drive it, but the car doesn't belong to you. When you want to upgrade, you just hire a new car.
Second one is platform as a service, that is PaaS. It is considered the most complex of the three layers of cloud-based computing. PaaS shares some similarities with SaaS. The primary difference being that instead of delivering software online, it is actually a platform for creating software that is delivered via the internet. This model includes platforms like Salesforce.com and Heroku. PaaS, platform as a service, is like taking a chauffeur-driven car. You don't need to drive a vehicle yourself, but simply tell the driver where you need to go and relax in the back seat.
Now, software as a service, it involves the licensure of a software application to the customers. Licenses are typically provided through a pay-as-you-go model or an on-demand service model. This type of system can be found in Microsoft Office 365. Now, SaaS is like going by a train. Trains have assigned routes and you share the ride with other passengers as well, but without having to sit with them because you all have your own very seats. Here's a great visual breakdown of all the three cloud service models. As you can see in the image, in an on-premises data center, you have to manage each and everything on your own. Then in an IaaS or infrastructure as a service, you manage less things than an on-premises and rest is managed by cloud provider. Then in platform as a service, you manage only data and application. Rest is all managed by your cloud provider. And in last, software as a service lets you manage only the data. Rest all is managed by your cloud provider. So now we have the fourth question for you all. Which of the cloud service models is analogous to a car rental service? Is it IaaS, infrastructure as a service, SaaS, software as a service, or is it PaaS, platform as a service? To answer the question, scan the QR code, or you can go to www.menti.com and use the code 69733220. So some of the people think that SaaS is the correct answer and some think PaaS is correct answer. But majority of the people have answered it correctly, and the correct answer is infrastructure as a service or IaaS. So let's move forward.
Now, deploying to the cloud. Now that you all know the cloud deployment models and cloud service models, Let's talk about software deployment. At the end of the day, that is what really matters. Picking the right cloud deployment model and service model helps you use the sources optimally, but the business benefits come from effective software deployment. It will not matter that you can deploy a platform in mere minutes if your deployment process takes an hour. There are a few ways you can deploy your software. Nowadays, the ability to deploy softwares quickly and often creates real business value. Companies that can't deploy new features or bug fixes at least once daily will fall behind the competition. Some companies are afraid to deploy software so often. This is due to possible issues and downtime. They choose the safer option of deploy less often with more testing and preparation upfront. But avoiding downtime and unexpected problems does not mean you will be not be able to deploy often. There are ways of deploying software often and safely.
Next up, let's have a look at the advantages of cloud computing. Cloud based software offers companies from all sectors a number of benefits, including the ability to use software from any device, either via a native app or a browser. As a result, users can carry their files and settings over to other devices in a completely seamless manner. Some of the other advantages of cloud computing are reduced IT costs, scalability, business continuity, flexibility of work practices, and access to automatic updates.
Now, as we have understood IoT and cloud separately, let's take a look at how these both technologies have a complementary relationship. While IoT generates large amounts of data, many cloud providers allow data transfer via the internet. That means it facilitates a way to navigate the data. Cloud computing helps to collaborate in IoT development. Using cloud platform, IoT developers can store the data remotely and access easily. Cloud computing helps to advance analytics and monitoring of IoT devices. IoT devices which utilize common APIs and backend infrastructure can receive important security updates instantly through the cloud as soon as any security breach happens in the infrastructure. This IoT and cloud computing combined feature is a vital parameter for user security and privacy.
Now, with all the speed, efficiency, and innovations that come with cloud technology and IoT, there are naturally risks. Security is one of the biggest issues with IoT. The IoT bridges the gap between digital world and physical world, which means that hacking into devices can have dangerous real world consequences. For example, hacking into the sensors or controlling the temperature in a power station could trick the operators into making a catastrophic decision. Taking control of a driverless car could also end in a disaster. Now, privacy is also concerned with IoT, with all those sensors collecting data on everything you do. Let's again take the example of Google Assistant. Have you ever wondered that whenever you say, "Hey Google" or "Okay Google," the Google Assistant magically pops up? Well, it's not magic. For the Google Assistant to always show up when you say the trigger word, it has to listen to you all the time. So that's a big privacy issue. Now, we do not know if Google stores all the voice recordings or just listens to it, although the company claims that it listens to you all the time, but it records your voice only after you say, "Hey Google" or "Okay Google." But it is still definitely a privacy threat.
Security has always been a big concern with the cloud, especially when it comes to sensitive medical records and financial information. While regulations force cloud computing services to shore up their security and compliance measures, it remains an ongoing issue. Encryption protects vital information, but if that encryption key is lost, the data disappears. Servers maintained by cloud computing companies may fall victim to hackers, natural disasters, internal bugs, and power outages too. The geographical reach of cloud computing cuts both ways. A blackout in Mumbai could paralyze users in Bangalore, and a firm in Delhi could lose its data if something causes its Indore based provider to crash. As with any technology, there is a learning curve for both employees and managers. But with many individuals accessing and manipulating information through a single portal, inadvertent mistakes can transfer across an entire system.
So now since we've seen both the technologies in detail, I want you all to let us know that what are your opinions about both of them. Is it a boon or is it a bane for the humanity? To answer the question, scan the QR code or go to www.menti.com and enter the code which is being displayed on the slide currently and let us know what you think. Okay. So some people think that it is a good thing, some people think that it is a bad thing, and majority of the people think that it is pretty much both. So they are neutral. So well, it all matters that how you use the technology, and it all depends on it. So thank you for answering. So as we are done with the theory part now, let's move to the practical part. Firstly, we'll learn how to deploy a website on Amazon Web Services or AWS Cloud. So to deploy your website, first we need to make a virtual machine. For virtual machine, we will make an EC2 instance on AWS Cloud, that is Amazon Web Services. I hope that all of you have made the account as it was mentioned earlier in the prerequisite. And even if not, we'll wait for 2 minutes. So you may do it using the link in the chat box or write AWS Management Console on Google. Also, we are attaching a file in the chat box. So it contains all the commands we'll be using to deploy our website on the AWS cloud so that you can do it along us. So I hope that you all have made your account. So now let's proceed to the project.
Now, in the search box, type EC2, select EC2 from the results. Okay, so here, this is how your AWS Management Console looks like. So from here, we need to choose the location of our availability zone, like where our instance will be, stored. So I will choose Mumbai. Okay, it is already selected. So I request all of you to choose Mumbai as it is the only data center it is showing in India. Okay. So now click on instances. Click on launch instances. So from here, we will be choosing the environment, the configuration for our virtual machine. So first, we will choose the Amazon machine image. And one thing I will be pointing out here is that we will only be choosing the free all the features which are available for free tier, and we will not be choosing anything like see there are so many operating AMIs are available, but we will choose only those features which will be eligible for free tier. So I will choose Ubuntu server 20.04 LTS. Click on select. Again, from here, I will choose T2.micro, which is also eligible for free tier. Now I will keep configure instance, add storage, and add tags default. Now I will directly move to security groups. Here I will click on add rule. Now I will open port for HTTP. I will source it from anywhere. Now I will click on review and launch. So from here, you can review your instance. See, whatever we have selected, it's all there. Ubuntu server and T2.micro, and we have HTTP in our security groups. So yes, everything is there. It looks fine. So we will move ahead and we will click on launch. Give your acknowledgement. And now click on launch instance. So, okay, so here you can see your instances are now launching. So it will take a few minutes. Till then we can see what all is available here. So see, all the modules are available here. All the guides, whatever you need to do with EC2, it's all available here. So if you are trying to do something else with your EC2 instance, you can come here, visit these guides and do whatever you want. So now let's click on view instances. Okay, so this instances we have made right now. So we will rename it and let's give it name STS session 4th July and save it. Okay, so you can see here the instance state has been changed to running. And what happens is your instance need to pass these checks. So there are two checks available as the above, as the this 2nd July instance have passed two checks. So this instance which we are making will also need to have pass these checks. So for that we need to wait for a few minutes and keep refreshing it. Okay, it is in initializing state, so you keep refreshing it.
If you guys have any doubt till now, you can write your doubts in the chat box and we'll try to answer them.
Okay, so here you can see that your instance has passed both the checks. Now let's go to the instance by clicking simply here. Click on the instance ID. So this is how your instance looks like. So guys, congratulations, you have made successfully your first EC2 instance. So now let's go and connect with our instance. Click on connect. Okay, so we will connect with our instance using shell command line. So click on connect. So this is how the shell command line looks like. So from here, we will be interacting with our EC2 instance, with our virtual machine. So I have the kindly copy all the commands I will be telling you from the document I have sent in the chat box. So kindly copy command number 2 from the document and paste it here and enter. So what this command contains, I will explain. So first, sudo we use to tell the virtual machine that you are the root user and suppose I am writing sudo, so I am asking my virtual machine that I am the root user and give me permission to write. And then we have the URL of the Node.js modulus, Node.js script, and that I took from the official website of Node.js. If you are using some other operating system, then you can copy another URL from the official website of Node.js. Okay, so why we are doing this? The website we are going to deploy will be available is based on Node.js script. So that's why we need to download Node.js in our virtual machine and we need to install it. So to install, copy this command. Copy this sudo apt -get install Node.js. So this command will install the downloaded Node.js script in your virtual machine. Okay, so so it has been installed successfully. So now what we are going to do is we will have to clone our Git repository here in the virtual machine. Then only we can deploy it now. So now we will make a folder where we are going to clone our clone our Git repository. So here there is a var folder that is a default folder available in all the virtual machines. So we will go into this folder by writing cd \var, and cd means cd means change directory, and / means when we don't know the location of the folder, that's why we use /var. And in this /var in this folder we will make a new directory. So write sudo mkdir, that is the command for making a new directory, and write www. So I will be cloning our website in this folder, that is www. So let's write command for cloning our GitHub repository. So kindly copy command number 6 from the document, copy it and paste it here. Okay, so double sudo, I need to erase one sudo. Okay, so enter. So this command will help us cloning our Git repository here in the virtual machine. Okay, so it is done. So now what we will do is we will install all the dependencies here of our project. So we will copy and write sudo npm install, which will install npm, which helps us installing all the dependencies here in the virtual machine, all the dependencies of our project. So let's see what all is here. Okay, the cd and write Disney, and then write this code sudo npm install. Okay, so it will take a few minutes. Till then, you can ask your query in the chat box. I'll be opening the chat box. Okay, let's see.
Also, in the meanwhile, you can check out our previous sessions, the video recordings of our previous session on the STME YouTube channel. It also contains this the video recordings from sessions from the last season of Sunday Tech Series.
Okay, so we are dealing with the private cloud and not the public one. Okay, so Alok wants me to start from the beginning. Okay, sorry Alok, because of timing I won't be able to start from the beginning, but of course I will be sharing we will be uploading this video on YouTube, so you can follow steps from there. And okay. Okay, so our dependencies have been installed. So let's see. Node modules folder has been made in our. Okay, so here you can see this node modules folder. So it contains all the dependencies of our project. So now let's make a build folder of our project. Copy command number 8 from the document, paste it here and enter. So what this command will do, it will make a build folder of our code. So what is the build folder? Build folder is the minimized version. See here you can see creating an optimized production build. So it will optimize your project and it will make a minimized version of your code. So it will delete all the extra spaces and everything of that sort that is not needed from your code, and make a small version of your project. So that's why we make a build, and we will be deploying this build folder there on nginx server. Okay, so Vajahat is asking me that AWS Amazon is asking for credit card details. So what should you do? Okay, so you should use a credit card with no balance, credit card of an account with no balance, as AWS may charge you some amount if you will click on unused, some charge services, or you can you need to put the credit card details, otherwise you won't be able to access these these services. So you need to do it, but to do it carefully. Follow the steps I am telling you here, and don't click here and there with no use, where you are not supposed to click. So please be careful while using AWS console. And of course, there's one more thing. Try to use a credit card which have very minimum balance or no balance. So that would help you. So let's see. Okay, so the build folder has been made here. Here you can see. So thanks to npm, it downloads all the dependencies by its own, and you don't need to copy it from here and there. Okay, so now we will install nginx nginx on our virtual machine. For that, copy this ninth command from the document. Let's go to home, enter it here, and okay, click, press Y. Yes, I want to continue. It will take a few seconds. Okay, so nginx has been installed in my virtual machine. It will be stored in a default folder with etc. So let's get into etc. Now let's get into nginx. OCD. I missed D. Okay, so now you are into this folder. Let's see what this directory consists. Okay, so here you can see it consists config.d, fast CGI parents, and etc modules available, modules enabled, sites available, and sites enabled, and etc. So what we need to do is we need to edit this sites enabled file. Let's get into this and see what it contains. Okay, so we are into, okay, or yes, I am using ls command, which will list all the files available in a particular folder in which you have folder. So suppose I am in sites enabled, so I will write ls, and it will list all the files available there in the sites enabled folder. So here you can see this default file. So we need to edit this default file. For that, we need to copy the build folder that we have created there. So we need to copy the path from there. So let's get the path, right, www, right, cd, and we will get into this folder, into that folder, right. Okay, so cd, so we will get into this Disney Plus folder, and we will go into build, and here we will write pwd. Pwd will tell you where you are in virtual machine. So here we need to copy the path. So we will write pwd, and from here we will copy the path. Okay, now let's get back to sites enabled folder, and let's edit that default file. For that, write cd /etc nginx, and from there let's go into the sites enabled folder, and here we will write sudo nano and default. So this is how your default file looks like. So here you need to control your cursor using the arrow keys. So come down. Okay, come down some more. Okay, so come down to this line. Here, I hope you all can see my cursor. So here we will edit this path. We will edit this path with the path of the build folder. So here I will paste the path I have copied from there, and we will press Ctrl plus O and then enter. This will save all the edits we have made in this file. And now press Ctrl plus X. This will bring you out of the file. And now here we need to start our Nginx server. For that, copy the command number 15th, paste it here in the command line and enter. So your Nginx server has been restarted. Now copy the URL from the AWS Management Console and paste it here. Okay. So here you can see you have successfully deployed your first website on EC2 instance. So congratulations to all of you. So here I need to point out some things. Okay, if any of you is facing any problem, kindly put it in the chat box. I will read it from there. Okay, good. Please share the YouTube channel link. Yes, Akansha, you will get the YouTube channel link via email after the session gets over. And why did you use HTTP? So, okay, I'm using HTTP instead of HTTPS because I have not attached the HTTP, the secured certificate. For HTTPS, you need a certificate. You need to attach the certificate here with your website. So I haven't done that. So that's why I'm using HTTP only. Please share it on the WhatsApp group. Okay, fine, Akansha. We will share it on the WhatsApp group as well. Okay, some of your commands were missing, so couldn't keep up. Swapnil, all the commands are there in the notepad file. Okay. So one thing I really need to point out here is so yeah, there are some other platforms available on the internet like Netlify, some of which are free to use and some of them are paid. But on these platforms, we simply drag and drop our code, our project code. We cannot choose the environment and operating system of our choice there, as we did here while making an EC2 instance in AWS. And another thing is that we don't know where these platforms deploy our websites and in which kind of virtual machines. But in AWS, you choose the location for your virtual machine, as well as you are provided with the security keys, and only you can access the data. So yes, that is why we deployed our website on AWS instance and not there on the available platforms. Okay.
So now that we have understood and learned that how to deploy a website on a real server, Amazon Web Services, now let's move on to our next project. We'll build a temperature alert system, a simple temperature alert system using an Arduino board. I'll explain further what is an Arduino board. So for that, first you'll need to create an account on tinkercad.com. I hope you all have made an account on tinkercad.com. Even if not, we still have 2 minutes. You can create your account on this website. Okay, so I already have my account, so I'll just sign in, but you need to click on sign up. So about the project, we'll be creating a temperature alert system using a temperature sensor in which we collect the temperature values from real time and we update that values to the Arduino board. Now, what is an Arduino board? So I'll tell you what's an Arduino board. Arduino is an open source electronics platform based on easy to use hardware and software. Arduino consists of both a physical programmable circuit board and also a piece of software. I'll show you. So if you're on the Tinkercad dashboard, you have to click on circuits and create a new circuit. Okay. So if you're on this page, in the search bar, type Arduino board. So here we have an Arduino Uno R3. You just simply drag and drop it over here. So this is the area where we will be creating our entire circuit, and for that first we have dragged the Arduino board. This Arduino board, and here we'll write the code. Sorry. This is where we'll write the code which will deploy onto the Arduino board after that. And this code I'll first delete it, and we'll write a code from scratch, and I'll explain you each and every line of the code. We'll write a really small code, nothing too difficult. Now this Arduino board can it is able to read inputs as well as it is able to produce an output. To read an input, for example, it can read light on a sensor. It can also read a finger or a button, or it can even read your Twitter message based on how we code it. And also it is capable of producing an output. So by that I mean that it is able to activate a motor. It can also turn on an LED, and it can also publish something online, again based on how we code our program. So you can tell your board, the Arduino board, what to do by sending a set of instructions or the code which we'll write in this window, and then it will be sent to the microcontroller of the board. Okay, so next thing we do is we take a temperature sensor. The temperature sensor we're using for this project is TMP36. Now TMP36 temperature sensor is a low voltage sensor, precision centigrade temperature sensor. It provides a voltage output that is linearly proportional to the Celsius temperature. Now in this temperature sensor, you can see that there are three legs. The rightmost leg is of ground. So this will be naturally connected to the ground pin of the Arduino board. Ground is nothing but 0 volts. Now the leftmost pin will be of power, and it will be connected to the pin which will supply power. So in this case, we need 5 volts power, 5 volts voltage to power our temperature sensor. That's why we'll connect it to the 5-volt pin, so that the potential difference between the rightmost and the leftmost leg remains 5 volt. Now the middlemost leg is the most important one. It will actually give us the input or the temperature reading which we want. So this one will be connected first. Let us connect, then I'll tell you what it is. You will have to connect it with the A0 pin. The A0 pin is now analog. So I'll introduce you to the concept of analog and digital also. You can see there are 6 analog input pins on the board, and there are 13 digital output pins on the board as well. So now what is analog and digital? Analog and digital are two types of electric signals. Analog is a type of continuous signal, whereas digital is a type of discrete signal, 0, 1, low or high, nothing else. So to understand it more, let's take a cricket match example. When a decision for a wicket goes into a third umpire's hands, it is either out or not out. Nothing other than that. It's not like that the umpire will say, okay, until 2 overs you're half out, and after that you'll be given full out. It's not like that. It's either out or it's either not out. Now, for the concept of analog, we can consider the number of overs. For example, in a T20 match, there are overs. Number of overs can vary from 0 to 20. It can also be in decimal. So that's a continuous concept. Whereas number of the decision out or not out, that is a digital concept. Yeah. So I hope now you're clear with the analog and digital concept. We'll continue with building our circuit now. Next thing we do is we connect an LED. LED, we are just connecting it because I'll tell you that we are creating an alert system, which means that we'll read the temperature from the environment if the temperature is more than a barrier value. Barrier value means the threshold or the danger value of the temperature, which we will be deciding what will be the danger value here. So for example, say that the temperature value is more than 45 degree, then the LED should blink. It should alert us that something's wrong. So here we're taking an LED. It's a really simple example. There's no involvement of internet here, but I just want to explain you that how you can actually collect values from a sensor and then send it to the internet. We'll go on to that later as well. So for an LED, there are two legs, anode and the cathode. So the anode will be connected. We will be connecting it to the 7th digital output pin. You can connect it to any number of pins, but we are connecting to a digital output pin. So digital output pin will help us light the LED in case of when the temperature goes beyond our range. And here we'll be taking a resistor as well, because there is a lot of current flowing through the circuit. So if you do not use a resistor, the circuit might get spoiled. So since it's a virtual setup, it might not affect us, but in general it's a good practice to connect to the resistor. So resistor will always be connected in series, and the negative leg of the resistor will be connected to the ground pin of the Arduino board. So our circuit is completed, all the connections are complete. Now we'll move on to the coding. If anyone is having any doubts, so you can ask in the chat box. Next thing we do is we write our code. So just a minute. Yes. In any Arduino code, we have to define two functions. First is void setup, and the other one is void loop. I'll tell you what both of them are. In the setup function, whatever we need to define once, for example, the initialization of variables or the setting the mode of the pins, which will come on to later, it is done in setup. So in short, that whatever code we want to run just one time, we'll write in the setup function, and whatever code we want the program to repeat again and again, so we'll write in the loop function. So for example, the temperature sensor value, we need to keep collecting the temperature sensor value, so we'll put it in a loop. Now we'll write the code inside the setup function. So the first line, you type along with me, I'll explain you later. Serial dot begin bracket 9600. So this is nothing but it is just a way of initializing our serial monitor. Serial monitor is nothing but the output screen of the Arduino program. So whatever, if we include a print statement in the program, whatever will be printed on the serial monitor. So this line is just to initialize the serial monitor. Next up, we write pin mode A0 as input. So I'll tell you what it is. Pin mode is a function to tell the Arduino board that what purpose will this pin serve. So for example, here I have passed as arguments A0 because our temperature sensor is connected to the A0 analog input pin, and also we're telling the Arduino board that it is a type of input. An input device is connected to this pin. So similarly for LED also we'll have to set the pin mode. So for that we've connected to the 7th digital output pin. So we'll type 7 comma output because we've connected an output device here. LED is an output device. We can also initialize our variables, but just now we do not know that how much variables we will be using in the program. So it is okay if we also initialize the variable in the loop method. It doesn't matter. So next thing we'll be doing, first I'll write the code. You all also type along with me, then I'll explain the entire line. Float temp is the variable which we'll be using to store the temperature values, equals to map 3 brackets, then analog read function. In the brackets we'll write A0 again, bracket closed, minus 20 again, bracket closed, multiplied with 3.04, again a bracket closed, comma 0 comma 1023 comma minus 40 comma 125. Yes, so I'll explain you what this line of code does. The temperature sensor value here does not give us directly this temperature in degree centigrade. It gives us a value between 0 to 1023 because it is an analog input pin. So it won't give us directly the temperature value. So what it does is that whatever value we collect from the temperature sensor, the analog read function is used to read from the A0 pin. Here we've passed A0, so it will read analog input from the A0 pin. So whatever value is collected using the A0 pin, it will be mapped using these ranges. Now these are the ranges. 0 and 1023 is the range of possible values the temperature output temperature sensor can produce, and minus 40 to 125 is the temperature range which it can detect, the temperature sensor can detect. So based on these ranges, the map function maps the value of temperature sensor and converts it directly into the degree centigrade scale. So this is what this line does. Next we'll be printing our temperature only. So serial.print helps us to print the temperature so that we can see that what is the temperature being collected. And next up, we'll also print a new line. This is just to make our output a little readable.
And
Serial.print is just a function to output your variable or anything you output into the serial onto the serial monitor. Next thing we do is we put a delay of 2 seconds or 2000 milliseconds. This is why, because that if you do not put a delay, the temperature sensor will keep on collecting the values. If you put the delay, the temperature sensor will collect the values after 2 seconds. And now we'll give a condition that if temperature is greater than or equal to maybe say 40 degrees centigrade, what should happen? The LED should blink. So how will we blink the LED? Firstly, write the code, then I'll explain. Digital write, sorry, digital write 7 because it's connected to the 7th pin, comma, high. Remember, I told you that a digital variable is capable of only taking two values, high or low, 0 or 1. So high here means that the LED will light up. And then to just give it a blinking effect, we'll give a delay of 1 second. Sorry, 1 second. And after that, we'll turn off the LED, saying 7 comma low. And after that, again, we'll give a delay of 1 second. So the delay we've introduced is just for the blinking effect, and also this all the 4 lines will be running in a loop so that it will give a blinking effect to our LED. The code is over now. So now what we'll do is we'll deploy this entire code into the Arduino. To do that, we'll click on Start Simulation. Okay, so here we can see that temperature collected is 25 degrees centigrade. So since it's a virtual setup, we are the only ones who will be varying the values of temperature here. So we have created this alert system just to understand that how exactly input and output sensors, actuators work in real IoT applications. So here we can vary the temperature using this slide bar. So let us vary it. You can see here that the temperature is increasing, decreasing because we are changing it. Now let us see what happens if we take the temperature value beyond our base temperature, which is 40 degrees centigrade. Here you can see that the temperature collected is 60 degrees centigrade, and also here the LED has started blinking. So yeah, this was a simple project which we have created, and now we'll move on to the integration of IoT and cloud. So we'll be showing you a real board. It is not an Arduino board, but it is something similar to an Arduino board. Now this Arduino board is also capable of sending the data to the internet, but it needs something known as a Wi-Fi module, which isn't available in this website. So I'll be using a built-in Wi-Fi module, a 2-in-1 chip, which is provided by Bolt, and we'll also be using the cloud of Bolt only. So now this project has been completed. So let's move on to the next project, which is the integration of IoT in cloud. So something about that project, I'll tell you that we'll be collecting real-time temperature values using this real temperature sensor. And this temperature sensor is being connected to the Bolt Wi-Fi module. It also has the A0 pin and also 4 digital pins. But in this module, in this project, we do not need the digital pin because we are not connecting it with any LED or buzzer. So we do not need the digital pin. But we'll have to connect the temperature sensor with the A0 or analog input pin. So this is a simple circuit connection. Now I'll show you how we can read the temperature values in real time, a real temperature value. So for that, firstly, we'll go to a Bolt cloud. I'm sorry that you cannot do this along with me, but if you see, you will enjoy it. So firstly, I have connected my Bolt module with my account in the Bolt cloud dashboard. So I'll firstly create a product. Product is nothing but a project what we are creating. So here we can name it anything. Let's name it temperature. Okay. So what would you like to connect to your Bolt? here we are connecting a temperature sensor, which is an input device. If instead of a temperature sensor we would be connecting an LED, then we would have chosen output device. But since temperature sensor is an input device, we are connecting we are selecting input device. Next is that how would you like to collect data? So here we'll select GPIO. I'll tell you what GPIO is. It stands for general purpose input output. It is a type of pin found on an integrated circuit. This is an integrated circuit. It does not have a specific function. While most pins have a dedicated purpose, but the function of GPIO pin is customizable and it can be controlled by the code we write. So we'll click on done. Our product has been created. Now we'll just link our hardware with this product. This is also a simple step. Okay, so now our hardware, the integrated chip, is also connected or linked to our product. So now we'll just configure our product to tell it that we need to collect real-time temperature values. So here, since I've connected the temperature sensor to the A0 pin, I'll be selecting A0 and I'll be giving it any name, say temp, since we gave the same name in the Arduino example as well. Now I'll save it. What it does is that it stores whatever value produced or read by the temperature sensor in the A0, and A0 we've given the variable temp. So whatever be the value, it will be stored in temp. Now we'll write a code. So the cloud dashboard provides only two languages to write the code, HTML and JavaScript. And frankly, I know none of them. So we'll be using something known as a code snippet and we'll not be writing a code by ourselves. So we'll use a code snippet. Here we are trying to collect the data points and visualize it using a graph. So here we can see many types of graphs, but I'll select the prediction graph. What it can do is that it can also predict a future value. So for example, after 5 minutes, what will be the temperature value based on the previous temperature values which the sensor has collected. So I'll introduce a prediction graph. We only have one variable temp. We'll generate and we'll insert. I'll explain you the code as well. So the 6-line code, set chart library. The dashboard provides many chart libraries, but we'll be using the Google chart library. Set chart title. In this we can write anything, any title we want. So let's give the title temperature prediction. Set chart type, it is the chart type which we selected from the list. Set axis name is that what name will be displayed on the x-axis and y-axis. So in x-axis we need to display time, and on the y-axis we want temperature. So let's just temp. Now this is the multiplying function. Since the sensor I'm using here is different from what we used in the Arduino example, so both of them vary in the ranges and the output they produce. That's why both of them cannot be mapped using the same function. There we used another map function where we used another conversion formula, and here we are just simply multiplying whatever be the temperature value, the input value with 0.0977 to convert it into degree centigrade. And plot chart will simply plot the chart between timestamp and our variable temp. So now let's save the code and send the code to our hardware, which is here. So I'll deploy the code now. So now since we have written the code and also saved it, now we'll click on deploy. Deploy does is that it sends the code which we've written into our this Bolt Wi-Fi module, and it also collects the sensor value. Now you all will be able to see when I click deploy that the green LED will blink. You can see the green LED blank. So this means that the code has reached here and a temperature sensor value has been read. So now we'll see the temperature sensor value, whatever be the value. Okay, so here the temperature which we have collected is 27.8 degrees centigrade. So the room which we are sitting in is 27.8 degrees cold or hot, whatever. It depends on you. So here we need to predict the future value. For that, we'll be using frame size 5. Now, what does this mean? This means that we'll be considering 5 temperature sensor values to predict the sixth one. So since we're using the free version, it allows automatic reading of the sensor value in every 5 minutes. But since we have a time foundation, we can do it manually. So we'll push the data to cloud 4 more times, and then we'll predict the value, temperature value. So let's see what's the second temperature value here. The second value we read is 27.7. Now, just to show you some variation, I'll cover the temperature sensor with my hand, and let's see what temperature is read now. Okay, so you can see that it has gone to 27.9 degrees centigrade. Again, I'll keep it covered only, and then I'll again push the data to cloud. Let's see. Okay, so the fourth temperature is again 27.8. So again, let's push the data to cloud. It will be our last point, and after that we'll predict the sixth point. Okay, so the last point is 28.2 degrees centigrade. Now we have our five points, so we'll simply click on predict. So it can predict the sixth point. The sixth point it will predict will be 5 minutes from this. So according to it, after 5 minutes, the temperature will be 28.346 degrees centigrade. So it can be true, it can be false. We do not know because it's a future value. So yeah, that was all. This was about the project where we show you how in real time we can collect a real temperature value from a real sensor and send it to a real cloud. And we can also visualize the data from there. And I hope you enjoyed. This was our entire project. So yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Next.
Over to you, Tanishka.
Thank you so much, Murtaza and Akriti. That was a wonderful session. Hope you all enjoyed learning about IoT and cloud. There will be another webinar on fundamentals of cybersecurity by Mr. Nakshatra Kaushik and Ms. Sejal Gupta, students of STME NMIMS Indore, on 11th July 2021. The registration link for the webinar will be shared with you in the chat box. Hoping for your active participation in the future webinars as well. Moving towards the end, I would like to thank our director, Dr. Prachi Gharpure, for providing us with the opportunity, Associate Dean STME and convener of this webinar, Dr. Akhil Banglawala, faculty team of the Sunday Tech series for their constant guidance, and the organizing team for making it possible. Once again, I would like to inform you all that you will be receiving the e-certificates within 3 to 4 working days on the basis of submission of feedback forms only. The link for the feedback form will be shared in the chat box. Thank you and hope to see you all in the upcoming webinars.